What's up, party people? It's Keys Dan with RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com, coming to you live in living color from the Radio What studios. And this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter? It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, where do you go? DJLittleRock.com. Check availability, get a free price quote, and maybe you can have me at your next event. I like to play for the people. If you want to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous.
Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, U.S. COVID-19 death toll surpasses that of Vietnam War. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases in the United States passed 1 million on Tuesday. The death toll has now reached more than 57,000, according to Johns Hopkins University. That surpasses the American death toll in the Vietnam War. The news came in a week when several states have started letting many non-essential businesses reopen for the first time in more than a month, despite warnings from public health officials that lifting stay-at-home orders before more testing and contact tracing is possible risks fueling a deadly second wave of infection. The number of new infections reported nationwide has been trending lower, but a surge on April 24th set a one-day record of 36,200 new cases. This is according to USA Today. Number 2, Hillary Clinton endorses Joe Biden. Hillary Clinton, the 2016 Democratic presidential nominee and former Secretary of State, endorsed former Vice President Joe Biden on Tuesday in a show of party unity. Quote, "We need a leader, a president like Joe Biden," end quote. Clinton said from New York in an appearance with Biden in a virtual women's town hall. She added that she was, quote, "thrilled," end quote, to join his campaign to, quote, "help highlight a lot of issues that are at stake at this presidential election," end quote. The two served together in the Senate, and Clinton said she had, quote, "watched Joe bring people together," end quote. Biden, who became the presumptive nominee when progressive rival Senator Bernie Sanders, independent Vermont, stopped campaigning and endorsed him, won Ohio's delayed primary on Tuesday, picking up 74 of the state's 136 delegates in a test of mail-in voting. This is according to CNN and CBS News. Number 3, Trump orders meat processing plants to stay open. President Trump signed an executive order on Tuesday to force meat processing plants to stay open to protect the food supply through the coronavirus crisis. Without the order under the Defense Production Act, one administration official said in a message to NBC News, quote, "the vast majority of processing plants could have shut down, reducing processing capacity in the country by as much as 80%, end quote. Industry analysts say pork and beef processing has dropped by 25% due to outbreaks at plants that have forced major companies, including Tyson Foods and Smithfield, to close at least 20 facilities. Trump said hours before making the move that his order would, quote, "solve any liability problems," end quote, meat processors faced. He did not elaborate about those problems. This is according to NBC News and The Washington Post. Number 4, China accuses U.S. of barefaced lies about coronavirus response. U.S. politicians have repeatedly blamed China's government for an allegedly botched response to the COVID-19 crisis, with President Trump saying Monday he'd consider billing China for damages. Beijing responded Tuesday, accusing those politicians of, quote, "telling barefaced lies," end quote, in an attempt to, quote, "shirk their responsibility," end quote, for their own subpar response. Quote, "American politicians have repeatedly ignored the truth and have been telling barefaced lies," end quote. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Jen Shuang said, quote, "they have only one objective, shirk their responsibility for their own poor epidemic prevention and control measures and divert public attention," end quote. Before the disease spread in the U.S., China had previously admitted to, quote, "shortcomings and deficiencies," end quote, in its coronavirus response. This is according to AFP. Number 5, Mnuchin. Small business loans over $2 million will be audited. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Tuesday that the Small Business Administration would audit all companies that received more than $2 million in loans intended for small businesses. Quote, "We want to make sure this money is getting to where it should be," end quote, Mnuchin told CNBC. The comments came a day after the Paycheck Protection Program started a second round of funding after Congress replenished its funds, which quickly ran out. The program attracted scrutiny when reports emerged of numerous large public companies that secured multi-million-dollar loans under the $660 billion program, which is designed to help businesses with fewer than 300 employees continue paying workers through coronavirus crisis shutdowns. This is according to the New York Times. Number 6, Democrats scrap plan for return to House. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, Democrat Maryland, said Tuesday that lawmakers would not be called back to Washington next week as planned. The decision came after members of both parties protested, arguing that the danger of COVID-19 coronavirus infection would be too high. Quote, "We made a judgment that we will not come back next week, but that we hope to come back very soon," end quote, Hoyer said. Hoyer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat California, made the call after meeting with the Capitol's attending physician, who recommended a delay because the number of coronavirus infections in Washington, D.C. was still rising. Quote, "The House physician's view was that there was a risk to members that was one he would not recommend taking," end quote, Hoyer said. This is according to Politico and the Washington Post. Number 7, Amash launches Presidential Exploratory Committee. Representative Justin Amash, Independent Michigan, announced Tuesday that he was forming an exploratory committee to seek the Libertarian Party's nomination for president. Quote, "Americans are ready for practical approaches based in humility and trust of the people," end quote, the former Republican said via Twitter. Quote, "We're ready for a presidency that will restore respect for our Constitution and bring people together," end quote. Amash, 40, was first elected in 2010 as a Tea Party conservative. He has been a vocal critic of President Trump and was the first and only House GOP member to support his impeachment. He left the Republican Party last July. If he runs, he could tip close races in swing states, although it was not immediately clear whether he would draw more votes away from President Trump or former Vice President Joe Biden. This is according to Politico and Justin Amash. Number 8, Pence declines to wear masks despite Mayo Clinic policy. Vice President Mike Pence toured the Mayo Clinic without a mask on Tuesday, despite the facility's policy requiring all staff and visitors to wear them as a precaution against spreading the coronavirus. A video of this visit showed Pence with a patient and 9 other people, all wearing masks. Pence, who leads the White House Coronavirus Task Force, told reporters that one reason he didn't need to wear a mask was that he is tested regularly and isn't infected. Quote, "Since I don't have the coronavirus, I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to be here, to be able to speak to these researchers, these incredible healthcare personnel, and look them in the eye and say, thank you," end quote, Pence said. This is according to CNBC. Number 9, Life of Pi actor Irfan Khan dies at 53. Veteran Bollywood actor Irfan Khan, best known in the U.S. for roles in Slumdog Millionaire, Life of Pi, and Jurassic World, died Wednesday after being admitted to a Mumbai hospital with a colon infection. He was 53. Khan, one of India's most famous exports to Hollywood, made his screen debut in the 1988 Academy Award-nominated Salaam Bombay, a drama about Mumbai's street children. He later worked with numerous directors, including Mira Nair, Wes Anderson, and Ang Lee. In 2018, he was diagnosed with a rare neuroendocrine cancer. He received several months of treatment in the UK. Quote, "I trust, I have surrendered," end quote. He wrote in a note after announcing he was fighting cancer. This is according to the Associated Press and CNN. Number 10, Oscars change rule requiring films be released in theaters. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has adjusted its rule requiring that films receive at least a limited theatrical release in Los Angeles in order to qualify for the Oscars. After a meeting of the Board of Governors, the Academy said on Tuesday that for the 2021 Oscars, movies that, quote, had a previously planned theatrical release but are initially made available, end quote, on streaming can now qualify for the awards as long as they meet other eligibility requirements and are made available on the Academy's streaming site within 60 days of release. The Academy said this is a, quote, temporary exception, end quote, that will no longer apply beginning, quote, on a date to be determined, end quote, after movie theaters reopen. This is according to Variety and the Oscars. That's 10 things you need to know today for Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. Thank you for listening. This has been What Makes You Smarter. I hope everyone out there is doing reasonably well. If you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's Keys Dan, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace. I'm out of here.
If you like what you hear, I encourage you to follow What Makes You Smarter on social media. Find it on Facebook at What Makes You Smarter, Instagram at What Makes You Smarter, Twitter at Smarter What, and YouTube, username Keys Dan. Leave What Makes You Smarter podcast a review and subscribe. Listen to What Makes You Smarter podcast on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. My personal favorite, learn with me on my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. And if you'd like to tell your story, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Call 501-470-6386 and leave a message to set up a time for What Makes You Famous. Support What Makes You Smarter podcast using the PayPal, paypal.me/Keys Dan. Email info@radiowhat.com. What Makes You Smarter is a production of Keys Dan Enterprises Incorporated at keysdan.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.